Oh, applause. I just love it. It reminds me of being a German teacher. Those were the days. Being a German teacher at a boarding school, just recently graduated 3 years before, and working with kids, children, students, pupils from 14 to 18 years who were unfortunately not very happy to be there because they were taken away from their families. They were there voluntarily, so there was an agreement, but they were not very happy to be there. I got the job, and then I understood what it means to have a very good economy. By that I mean that I was a German teacher, and when I was teaching German, I did teach other subjects. But when teaching German, I found it so difficult because I was not trained to become a German teacher. I just did it because they said, "Can you do it?" And I said, "Yes." So that reminded me of what Gus said before. But what I understood, I was teaching German, I was teaching Danish, I was teaching politics, I was teaching sports, and I was teaching English. Not bad, good fun. And what I understood was that if there is no foundation, if there is not good concrete, because I don't agree that concrete should be removed. I don't agree. I think good concrete and there's bad concrete. So you remove the bad concrete, but you keep the good concrete. And the good concrete is the foundation. That's the foundation for a school. And as I've understood, and as it was at my school, the school leader there, he was a brilliant guy he could get funding. He was so good at getting funding. His name was Per, and he was a mixture of the two last guys we just saw, Gus and the man from the bank. So he was just a mixture of that. So he was a chaos pilot, and he was very good at numbers. So I think we should keep the buildings. And I think School for Life showed us that yesterday. We should keep the buildings. And we should have a sound and good economic welfare in the schools. And if we have that good concrete, then we can experiment. But I think we need money to experiment. And I know you can experiment and you can do a lot of things, yes. But the money makes it much more easy. So 3 years in being a German teacher, I said to my school leader, "So Per, I was thinking, could I take like 10 students to Berlin?" Mind you, these students were having, learning difficulties. They were from disadvantaged families. They sometimes had behavioral problems, you could say. So I said, I'll just take 10, and I'll bring the secretary. So it's not because we had an affair. We were just colleagues. We were just working together, and she was a fantastic woman. Anyway, so we went to Pierre. He said to me, "Of course." He always said yes. And I said, "So you need a budget?" "Yes, please." So I gave him a budget and said, "Let's do it." So I went away, and I did that for 4 years in a row. Maybe it was even 5. I went to Berlin with the German students, and suddenly they understood why is German so important. Suddenly they understood. Because someone had been what we do not call a school business administrator, but someone had done the same job to put in some good concrete so that the teachers on the school, including myself, could do what we wanted to do with the students, and that was so fantastic. If I wanted a new textbook, I said to Pierre, "Can I have a new textbook?" And he said, "Yes, of course, we've got the finances for it." So I think it's such an important job you do. So my name is Casper, and I'm very happy to be here. We've been waiting since January, because we were booked in January, so we've been waiting and waiting and waiting. So we arrived yesterday morning, and I couldn't sleep. I woke up 2 o'clock at night, this night, just like this. I'm thinking, oh boy, it's tomorrow, and now it is. So I'm very happy to be here. So I think that's enough. Maybe I should say, I know it's very important to say that we do understand you're not teachers. And I also can say that in Denmark, if you're a teacher, you marry a teacher, actually. And I tried to do something else. So I married someone who was not a teacher. So I'm a teacher, she's not a teacher. What do you think about that? Huh? And we've been married for 21 years. Not bad, is it? Yeah, I think it's cool. But she's the daughter, obviously, of 2 teachers, of course. So we always talk about teaching, my wife and I, her parents, and we talk about teaching. Her mother's 83 now, and she's so much into teaching still. Did you hear that new thing about? And then she knows something who's, the latest news in teaching. She's amazing. Anyway, that's it for me. I think I'm Casper, And to make it easy for you, we went to a numerologist, and we paid 500 Australian dollars, and they said, well, I will just call you Kasper and Casper. So Casper with a C and Casper with a K. Easy, wasn't it? So that's the other Casper.
Hello, everyone. Thank you. I haven't been a German teacher, though, so I'm not used to that. Well, like Kasper, I'm Kasper, and like Kasper, I'm also Danish. And like you, the motto in my work is to improve schools and make good schools even better. I went to a dinner party a couple of weeks ago and with friends of friends, so in order to get to know each other, we had to describe ourselves with one word, and everyone else was seeming to say all the right stuff. Family, healthiness, challenges, family, healthiness. And I went, I'm Kasper, and I'm a schoolaholic. Because I really think I am. I don't think my wife sitting next to me felt very special at that point, but I am. I'm obsessed with everything about schools. Teaching, school leadership, school administration, school politics. I've been a student and a teacher at almost every level of the Danish educational system. I am married to a teacher. All my friends are teachers. My oldest boy goes to school. And if I'm not working on a school, I'm usually on my way home from school or on my way to a school or talking about schools. I actually also have quite some experience with private schools, because after teaching for many years, I got a job as a vice principal on a Danish private school. What I didn't know when I accepted the job, I was told at the first day of work. So the principal told me, and I quote, "You need to make the parents stop taking their children out of the school. And you need to bring in some new ones. And by the way, we don't have any money to do it." So that was a great start at my new job. So I can't take all the honor of succeeding, because I was part of a great team. But I was part of this team, and I was part of the process where we, during a period of 2 to 3 years, tripled the number of pupils in school. And listen, for those of you who listened to Annabelle Chauncey yesterday, I know that sounds like nothing, I know. But the reason why I mentioned this experience is because it gave me a profound belief that, talking about school development, anything is possible. So today I work alongside with Casper doing school development. We've been doing that for the past many years now. And we do that primarily in Denmark and the Nordic countries, but also abroad when we're lucky enough to get invited. So thank you for that. I don't think we've ever tried to be sponsored, though. So thank you to Rico for sponsoring us.
So what are we going to talk about today? Well, let's look into that. Casper, you've got the clicker. He's the smartest guy. You've discovered that already. He's the smart guy. So we're going to share with you the 4 basic values of the Nordic school system. We'll get into what are the Nordic countries, and you've probably been there. So we'll get into all that. But we'd like to talk to you about trust, because trust is such an important part of what we do. Another thing we'd like to talk about is we don't compete. And we'd like to tell you a bit about how we minimize the distance. And lastly, we know how you feel. And we're going to talk about that. Not how you feel, but how the children, how the pupils in the Nordic schools feel, and how we work with social and emotional learning. So hopefully you will learn about the similarities and differences between the 2 school systems, the Australian schools and the Nordic schools, the 4 basic values that I just mentioned, how our leadership supports the work we do in the Nordic schools, focusing very much on social and emotional learning, and why and how we work with social and emotional learning, and how you can manage social and emotional learning in Australian school. And when I say the last thing, you know, it can sound a bit weird, but it's just to give you an inspiration on how to do it, and we'll get back to that. So those are the things I hope you will learn. Some things we will talk a lot about, some things a bit less, but we hope to cover it all, including the questions.
Yes. So the next question is, why should you even hear about the Nordic schools? And to be honest, I'm not so sure anymore, because reading up on the Australian school system, I stumbled across this article written by a very recognized Finnish professor called Pasi Sahlberg. He's like become a voice for the Finnish educational system. He moved to Sydney. He lives there now with his wife and children. And he states in the article that from what he has seen so far, you have one of the best educational systems in the world. So I think you should give yourself an applause for that, actually. So I'm not quite sure yet that you can learn anything, but let's see about that. What we experienced, though, is during the past years, a consistent tendency that foreign school systems seem to seek inspiration in the Nordic schools. And when we talk to foreign educators, either when we go abroad or when we arrange school visits at home, they say that they're interested in hearing about two different things. First of all, they want to hear about our ability to, a certain extent, stay immune to this general educational reform movement, going towards more and more accountability, more and more standardization, especially test-wise, and keep the focus on the local context. That's number one. Number two is our ability to seem to make the students, make the pupils perform well academically, but at the same time, keep a focus on all the soft skills. So focus on the pupils' well-being, focus on social and emotional learning, and focus on Bildung. And Bildung, what is that? That's a very fluffy concept, I think, but I think the Swedish writer Ellen Keyes defined it pretty well more than 100 years ago when she said that Bildung is what is left when you've forgotten what you've learned. So, I think before we move on, I think it's important to stress that we don't fool ourselves to believe that we have a better education system than you, and we don't want this talk to come across as our country is better than you. But our intention, though, today is to share some thoughts and share some perspectives on the Nordic schools with a combination of facts and philosophy and storytelling that hopefully can serve as inspiration for you school business administrators.
Right. So let's get to it, the Nordic countries. Some would call them the Scandinavian countries, which is absolutely true. So when we are talking about the Nordic countries, we actually mean the Scandinavian countries. We were obviously not geography teachers. So we're talking about Denmark, Norway, Sweden, and Finland. Or if you've seen the Vikings, you know what we're talking about. How many of you have seen the Vikings series on HBO? Viking? Yes. It's fantastic, isn't it? Well, that's the way we work normally. Just to give you an idea, it's Germany just under Denmark. So yes, it's Germany is very close to Denmark. Don't tell the Danes, because they all think that they're very special. Very, very special. And not like the Germans. So when you go to, for example, Australia, Tasmania, then people say, well, are you from Germany? And we're like, no, we're from Denmark. And they say, oh, Germany. So, and you've got Great Britain over there. Let's not talk about that. We've heard what they're doing to our economy right now. They've got this other kind of Trump type running the country right now. Very sad. Anyway, so here we are in the Nordic countries. And in the Nordic countries, of course, we have different school systems, but they remind of each other. So what we're saying today could be, we'd like to talk a bit about Finland, and then we'll say something about Denmark, and then we'll say something about Sweden, and so forth. Now, let's dive into Denmark, because we're from Denmark. So we just thought it's the smallest country geographically. So let's just a few words upon Denmark. So up left, you have Lego. How many of you have been playing with Lego bricks? That's quite a few. They're from Denmark. And we're so proud. I mean, that's a footprint in the world, isn't it? We've done it. That's a new kind of Viking way, you know, to conquer countries via Lego. It's more mild somehow. And anyway, Carlsberg beer is actually 500 meters from where I live is Carlsberg. It means Carl's Little Mountain, because the founder was obviously called Carl. Carl's Little Mountain. And now we're in Tasmania, and you would just call it, well, Carl's Little Dwarf Hill or something. But in Denmark, the highest mountain is 150 meters. So, you know, yeah, we do a lot of bike riding. And our mountains are like this, so we call it Carlsberg. Anyway, Carlsberg beer, you probably know. And then, well, we moved the house, we built it, and then we moved it to Sydney. Maybe you've heard about it, the Opera House. Actually, the architect behind it was a guy from a family who lived just next to the school I was working on. His kids were not going there, I will stress. But he was known to be a very, very nice man, and his whole family was known, Mr. Utzon, Jørgen Utzon. And he was the brain, the architect behind the Opera House. So we have that in common. Although he was sacked from the project when they started building after a year or two, they just sacked him, but he came back, as far as I remember. Somebody probably knows the story better. Anyway, those are just a few things from Denmark. But just yesterday, I read it in the newspaper today, here, also read it in the newspaper, in the Danish newspaper yesterday. Just yesterday, our crown, we have a monarchy, our crown princess, she's from Tasmania. Isn't it amazing? Yes. So that's why we have 3 photos of her. We've been working with a school called the Absolute Joy School. It's true. If you translate the name, it's the Absolute Joy. And it's in a very deprived area, and the school leader is absolutely fantastic. And I told him we're going to Tasmania, and then he texted me and sent photos via Messenger and said, guess who visited yesterday? Mary. And he said, you want more photos? Because she's really beautiful. I said, no, that's too much. Anyway, here she is. And why we mention her, obviously because she's local, she's from Tasmania, but also because she's the hardest working member of the royal family. And that doesn't say much, but it does say something. And what she did when she came, of course she knew I have to make an impact. And she made something, together with her advisors, of course, she made something called the Mary Foundation. And they work with social and emotional learning, and they do a lot of work, and she does a lot of good work with anti-bullying. And it's a huge subject, well-being and anti-bullying, and she's been doing a great job. So I'm not just mentioning her because she's from here. Actually, she's doing a fantastic job. So praise to Tasmania and praise to Mary Donaldson. And she's not called Donaldson anymore. Now she's called the Crown Princess. But actually, to be honest, the Queen just said, she's 74, I think, the Danish Queen, and she's leading the country, well, you know, as the monarchy, and she just said, well, I'll die before I'll stop being a queen. But anyway, we'll see. If she becomes 110, then Mary will be very old when she's a queen. But she will be one day, we hope. Right, Casper, I think that's enough.
Yeah.
Enough royal stories.
I can feel I need to keep you in a very tight leash today.
Yes.
Because we can see the time up here. So if I just start speaking faster, that's why. Well, I knew that would happen. Now I'm going to do like this. I think it's important before we move on to say that talking about the Nordic countries, it is important to keep in mind that we're talking about 4 different countries with many, many similarities, many of the same fundamental values, but also with differences. So especially Finland seems to be, in some sort of ways, to be different. They seem to be very, very self-confident in the way that they do things. Educational-wise, that's something that we are a bit envious of, looking up to, but also in many other aspects. Did you know that vodka is called vodka in every language in the world, except from in Finland, of course, where it's called Koskenkorva. So, yeah, well, I think just that says a lot about how they perceive themselves, and we'll elaborate on that later on. But there are also many similarities between the Nordic countries and the Nordic and Australian school systems. So taking a look at the OECD report, Education at a Glance, you'll find many of those examples. Here are a few. We have the same, more or less same educational output of educational institutions. We also, maybe except from Finland, are more or less in the same level in the PISA ranking, above the OECD average, and we also have the same class sizes. But obviously, there are also differences, and those are the ones that we're going to focus on today. So, first of all, you would be out of a job in Denmark, in the Nordic countries, because we don't have any school business administrators. Those tasks are usually being taken care of by the school leadership and the board, usually consisting of parents. Second, we don't have a division between primary and secondary schools, so we have a unity school. In Finland, they have no private schools. In Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, we have private schools. In average, about 18 or 19% of the pupils go to private school. And I think in Australia it's about, and correct me if I'm wrong, 1 out of 3? Is that correct? Or less? And then lastly, and that's something that we're going to talk more about later, we have very, very little standardized testing.
So, Kasper, could you flip? Thank you. So, what is this? This is the countryside in Denmark. and you drive past on your bike, which would be normal, or in your car, and you will say, oh, I need some strawberries. You go in, and you take the strawberries and put down some money, or you mobile pay some money, and then you leave. So that's trust. And that's a basic value in our country. And we think that trust origins from the school, obviously from your family, obviously from kindergarten, but also from the schools. You spend 10 years in school, so trust is such a fundamental thing. Now, when you talk about trust, it can be a bit like, violins playing, and yeah, we trust each other. So let's just do a little exercise. Now, can you please show me your mobile phone? Please show me your mobile phone. Yeah. I'm not going to steal it. No, it's not like that. We're not going to send it to School for Life. Not yet. Maybe during lunch. All right. Please hand your phone over to the person next to you. Just hand it over. Yeah. And how is it going? Do you trust the person next to you? So, we could ask you to open your phone and give it, but that would be to take it a bit far right now, although it's tempting, I must say, judging from your reaction. Well, you can give the phone back to keep people's attention. So trust is such a fundamental thing. You go into a classroom and you need trust. You need the teacher to trust in you. You need the person to trust that the work you do is the right work. Anyway, there is a World Value Report. It comes out, I think it's every 5th year. The last one was in 2014. And there you have some numbers. The question was, do you agree that most people can be trusted? Well, in this room, I'm not quite sure. Anyway, judging from your reaction just before. But let's keep to statistics and not judgments. In the Nordic countries, the average is 76.3%. 76.3% of people trusting other people that they don't really not know. In Brazil, who just had a new government, and I promise not to be political, but they just had a new government. Well, not going that well, I must say. 6.5%. I mean, that's very sad. They don't trust institutions. They don't trust other people. They trust nothing and nobody. Besides from their own family, maybe. Anyway, in Australia, good news. 54.4%. World Value Report. It's so interesting to read what are the values that you educate your children with. And one of the things you could educate them with is to trust other people. Now, if we flip the slide, you can say that the teachers trust the students. Because in the Nordic countries, we want the children to work, we want to trust them, we want to say to them, I trust you with the responsibility of thinking and working. I actually think you can think for yourself. We went to England last year, and in England we saw a lot of teaching, and there are some fantastic people there, of course there are, and some brilliant teachers. And in the Plymouth area, we visited a couple of schools, brilliant school teachers, but the way of teaching was a bit different than I prefer, because it was so instructive. So the teacher in one room said to, actually next to each other, said to the children, all right, so you have to cut this out, blah, blah, blah. They had a pair of scissors, and the teacher would go around and take the hand. I will take your hand now, Richard, and you have to do it like this. Instead of saying, you have to go from A to B to C, they would just say, okay, I'll control you, and then I'll control you. So what we would do in a Nordic context would be to say, do this, and I trust that you can think for yourselves. So if we ask John Hattie, who did visible learning, how many of you know John Hattie? I just want to be, yeah. So educational consultant, statistic, and he's been doing a lot of work with visible learning. How can you see that people actually learn something? So he's a statistic. He's a professor in statistics, and he's been doing a lot of work with teachers. He says in visible learning, in English schools, the teacher would speak 70 to 80% of the time, controlling the environment all the time, whereas in the Nordic schools, it would be 30 to 40%. Because trust is so important, and we trust the kids to think for themselves. Now, Casper, before you go on, and I'll say this, there is something about this timing, because it says there is...
I just talk...
and it's 11:31. I don't know about your watches, but it's until 12,
It's
isn't it? So 10 minutes till-
everything is in order. We
Yeah,
just talked about
so I'll
that.
just talk about Mary again. So Mary Donaldson... No, I won't.
Yeah.
Beautiful. So, we don't have a curriculum. And when we go to England and say that they're fainting, nobody's fainted yet. Because what? Then what are people doing? What are the teachers doing? Well, they're teaching. But the state trusts the teachers to think for themselves. Of course there is a law. Of course there are some things they have to do. It's not, so what do you want to do today? It's not like that. But it's not as tightly done as it is in other countries. And I think you all have a curriculum. And I know it varies from province to province and from state to state. I understand that. But still, there is a curriculum. We do not have that. And actually, in Finland, they're crazy. They're just saying all the time, no, they're just totally trusting the teachers to think for themselves and decide what to do with kids. So they can say, okay, we have a subject called Finnish. Find out what's the best thing to do. Whereas in Denmark, it's a bit more controlled. But still, there is no curriculum. So that's the final thing we want to say about trust.
So moving on to the next value. So here's a paradox. The OECD suggests that we should look towards the top performing countries in the PISA report for inspiration. So when you ask Pasi Sahlberg, who I referred to earlier, this Finnish educational expert, when he's asked what is the secret behind the Finnish educational system and behind their success, he highlights one specific reason which I find quite surprising. So he says, the main reason why we perform so well is because we've never wanted to become number one. And I think that's quite interesting because it's very opposing to what's going on in many parts of the world right now, where we're so eager on comparing ourselves to other countries, other regions, other schools nearby. He tells this quite funny story, actually, about two Finnish friends taking a walk in the Finnish woods. So entering the woods, they see this sign. Either way, they walk on and they chit-chat and they enjoy the nature, and all of a sudden one of them stops, completely paralyzed, saying to his friend, "There's a bear right over there. What do we do now?" The other one doesn't really seem to be affected by this situation, just calmly takes off his backpack and sits down, takes off his hiking boots, pulls out a pair of sneakers and starts to put them on. And the other one goes, "What on earth are you thinking about? You cannot run from a bear just from pulling on some sneakers. We need to make a plan here. What are you doing?" And the other one goes, "No, I know, but I can run faster than you." So I think this story captures quite well what is going on in this educational reform movement right now. That if we are so eager on comparing one another through standardized testing, we might risk to lose sight of what is actually the best thing for our own educational system. So we need to ask ourselves, are we counting what can easily be counted, or are we actually counting the things that counts? So my point is that we can use big data such as PISA and national testing on the academics for many things. Those are the things that can tell us what is happening. But if we don't know how to create and how to use small data, we might never find out why these things are happening. So I think that's quite an important point from Pasi Sahlberg here. In Finland, as I said before, they have no standardized testing. The teachers are trained. Well, first of all, they all have a master's degree. And secondly, they're all trained in creating the tests and assessments locally. In Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, we're quite envious of that, and we are struggling to follow that example. So let me just give you one specific example on one of the initiatives going on that we're involved with in Denmark. They're called learning conversations. So basically, all the teachers are trained in questioning techniques, and they're trained in conducting conversations between the teachers and the students. So 20 minutes talk, focusing on a specific competence or strength. That could be engagement or perseverance or curiosity or courage, something like that. So by asking deliberate questions, not only do they stimulate the pupils' metacognitive skills and ability to reflect upon their own learning, they're also gaining very, very valuable knowledge about the pupils. So just to give you an example of how this small data is valuable for them, I experienced just a couple of weeks ago when I visited one of the schools, a teacher told me about the challenges the group of teachers had with a specific student that seemed very disengaged, very demotivated, and to be honest, they told me that they were quite annoyed with this student. So by asking 3 to 4 questions in one of these learning conversations regarding his own perception of the word engagement, it came out that in his family, they never ate breakfast. That was quite surprising. So they never ate breakfast. So he got up at 6 o'clock in the morning and he had his first meal at 11:45. So no wonder he was disengaged. So, and actually a week after the conversation, he went up to one of the teachers saying, "Thank you. I had no idea that breakfast was so important." Yeah, and I know it sounds funny when you talk about it, but this is just one out of many, many examples of how working with small data, using them, creating them, is enabling the teachers to succeed in doing their job.
So how many of you remember having a hero? Oh, that's very sad. Oh, I hope some of the hands that were just like this was all right. All right, well, I remember having a hero. I still have heroes. I'm only 51. I'm allowed to have heroes. So the next picture is a hero of mine. Because we want to minimize the distance between the teacher and the student. So, Per Fibæk Laursen, he's the writer of 46 books. And he's the one who said this. He says, in the Nordic countries, we want to minimize the distance between the teacher and the students, but also in the school management. So we went to a meeting, Kasper and I, and we were at this school he just mentioned, which is called the Birdsong School. They have weird names, these schools, but that's the Birdsong School. Anyway, we went to the Birdsong School, and they talked about they wanted to implement, they wanted us to help them to implement learning conversations. And then at the meeting, the school leader, he was starting, being the one who was directing the meeting and saying, welcome, and thank you for coming, and being very serious, and he had the agenda, and he was being what you could say he had more knowledge. Then he started to ask a question. So what do you think about the agenda? What do you think we should do? What do you think about this problem? How can you solve this? He started to seek equality. He wanted to show that, yes, he's the boss, but he's also interested in other people. He wanted to be equal. And then, to my surprise, one of the teachers in the room, who was an internal learning consultant, you could say it, learning expert, she was the one who was supposed to implement things on schools when we'd left. She said, Rasmus, the name of the school leader, I don't think you're right. When you say that, I think that's absolutely wrong. I think some things will be different, blah, blah, blah. And then he said, to my surprise, well, I think you're right. Actually, thinking of it, you're absolutely right. I'm totally mistaken. Oh, yeah, it was such a good idea I had, but no, let's do it your way. What a brilliant idea. So what I'm talking about here is that, skip the slide, we want to do like this guy. We want to know more, we want to be equal, and we want to humble ourselves to minimize the distance. And this could be in the classroom, or this could be at a teacher-staff meeting, or this could be in your daily work, meeting colleagues, working with other people. Now, this guy is called Søren Kierkegaard. He's a philosopher, and 150 years ago, he wrote a text. And he's hiding right over here. Because in this text, he explains this thought, this way of thinking. And this way of thinking has been massaged into the brains of teachers, school leaders, school staff in our countries, in the Nordic countries. And that is why I want to read the text for you. Because I think it sums up the whole idea, thank you, the whole idea of what I'm talking about. But obviously, it's written 150 years ago. So the language is a bit weird, but I hope you can go along with me, and I hope I can read it aloud so you understand what I'm saying in my Danish accent. Anyway, the art of helping. If one is truly to succeed in leading a person to a specific place, one must first and foremost take care to find him where he is, and begin there. This is the secret in the entire art of helping. Anyone who cannot do this is himself under a delusion if he thinks he's able to help someone else. In order to truly help someone else, I must understand more than he, but certainly, first and foremost, understand what he understands. If I do not do that, then my greater understanding does not help him at all. If I nevertheless want to assert my greater understanding, then it's because I'm vain or proud. Then basically, instead of benefiting him, I really want to be admired by him. But all true helping begins with the humbling. The helper must first humble himself under the person he wants to help, and thereby understand that to help is not to dominate, but to serve. And that to help is not to be the most dominating, but the most patient. That to help is a willingness, for the time being, to put up with being in the wrong and not understanding what the other understands. Now that's the way we try to think every day. We want to minimize the distance. And actually, it reminds me of a paper I wrote when I was 14. It's a wonderful text, I think. I mean, no, it's not true. It's not true. I'm just kidding. Anyway, Casper.
Moving on to the next one. And so the next one is about social and emotional learning. So, and the last value is called we know how you feel. And in order to give you an idea of how we're working with social and emotional learning, we'd like to do a little interactive game with you. Are you up for that? Great, great. I'll take that as a yes. So, in a moment, one of you down here is going to come up here and do a game called Crazy Karaoke. So, I'm going to play a song for you. You're going to get headphones in your ears, and you're going to be hooked up with a microphone, and you're just going to sing along. It's a song you know. So you're just going to sing along, and the job for the rest of you is to guess, in 30 seconds, guess which song it is. Okay? So the way that we're going to find out is that I'm going to ask you very kindly to take up your hands like this. Great, thank you. So before you all came in, that's why we locked all the doors. So before you came in, I put a gum under one of the seats down here. Actually, quite a few gums. You see, it's almost empty. So, in a moment, you can't feel right now, but when I allow you to, you can feel whether the gum is under your seat. And I know where I put it, so I know there is someone sitting on that seat. So, now you can feel. Okay, don't worry. That was just a joke. That would be social suicide, wouldn't it? If I... Well, first of all, it's pretty disgusting with the gum, and it would be social suicide if I did it. So let me just ask you, any of you felt insecure, anxious? Quite a few. Okay, great. And any of you felt or thought, if it's me, I'm not going up there? Yeah. Okay, I thought so. In our schools, in Norway, in Sweden, in Denmark, in Finland, probably also in Australia, we have children in our schools feeling that way. So we now know we have more and more research to underline the fact that the healthy and sound and secure learning environment is so determining for who we become. And the relationship between the teacher and the student is determining for the quality of the education. So maybe some of you even remember some of those feelings from your own school time. I don't know. I know I do. So the sum of emotions you gather in your school life seem to transform into life. Not only the feelings towards and your self-efficacy towards all the vocational tasks and skills, but also all the other feelings. Did the teachers like you? Were you part of a group? And so on. So I think a very important question for a school system to ask itself, what is the purpose and what is the most important job of our schools? Is it to make the pupils become something or make them become someone? And I think in many countries around the world, not in Australia, of course, on the other side of the globe, There is countries only focusing on the first one. So I think in Scandinavia, what we are succeeding in is to have a balance between the two, and it is to work systematically with the children's well-being and the relationship between the teacher and the student. So just to give you a few examples, when we are to assess whether the pupils are ready for moving on to college, we do this, well, we call it a UPV. It's basically just an educational readiness assessment. We assess the personal, social, and practical subject skills equally. So we look at the personal preconditions, such as motivation, accountability, independency, and so on, and the social preconditions, collaboration, respect, and tolerance, and the practical subject skills equally. So it's a three-legged chair. Secondly, we also test the well-being. We do that consistently. We do it nationally and we do it locally. And luckily, it turns out in Denmark that 93% of the children actually like going to school. So they like their schoolmates, they like the classes, they like the teachers. Unfortunately, 7% do not. And if I was selling cars or shoes or something like that, I'd say a 93% hit rate is good, but it's just not good enough when you're working in schools. So I'll get back to what we are doing with that in a moment. Thirdly, and changing the perspective a bit, I think, in addition to my previous points, the role of the teacher has changed during the past decades. So from being a content expert, we see a much more complex role of the teacher. And we tried to capture that in this model called the Nordic teaching model, and we brought some along for you, some hard copies if you're interested. So it basically consists of three fundamental competences that you need to have as a teacher: teaching competence, classroom management competence, and the social competence. And I won't drag you through the whole model today, but I'll draw the attention to the social competence, because I think that in this context is the most underestimated one. So an example of how we work systematically with the social competence, I'd like to tell you a little story from my own life. My first year of teaching, I was off at work, so I was waiting at the bus stop for the bus, and one of the parents came, and we were chit-chatting, and after a while she asked about her daughter Nana, and she asked whether she'd had a good day or not. And then I stopped. Guess why? Because I couldn't remember whether she was there or not that day. So as you see, I was left with two different choices. I could tell her the truth and say, I don't really know, because to be honest, I can't remember whether she was there or not. Or I could tell a lie and say that, well, she's had a good day. And I went with number two. You can't tell anyone. I'm not very proud of it, but I did. The reason why I tell this story is that I promised myself that I would never be in that situation again. So after that, along with Casper, I developed this model, which is actually quite widely used in Denmark by now, called the relationship overview. So it looks like this. On the left-hand side, you see a matrix where you have the y-axis that says something about how often do you have one-on-one contact with the student, and the x-axis telling about the quality of the relationship. So is it a positive or a negative contact? And then we have the last box down at the bottom. And that's the one where Nana belonged. Those are the types of students where you have a hard time actually explaining or defining your relationship with them. Is it a good or bad? I don't know, because they seem to disappear among all the other students. I don't know if you recognize students like that from your school, but they are out there. And on the right-hand side, so you have each individual teacher filling out this matrix with all the students, and after that, the team of teachers gather their responses in this form on the right-hand side. So it paints a picture of which students have a sufficient amount of good relationships with the teachers and which ones who don't. The reason why I show you this model is that when we have foreign educators visiting the Danish schools and they see this, they see the teachers working with this, they seem quite surprised because evidently it is quite time-consuming. So they ask, why do you spend time on that when you could spend time in the classroom teaching math or Danish or whatever? And what they say is, what the teachers say and what the principals say, is that this is an investment that pays back multifold. And now I can almost feel Kasper's breath in my neck because I think he wants time to finish off before questions.
And I just wanted to say that for us, to work systematically is so important. So this is where I agree with Mr. Banker and less with Gus. Because I think the children need systems. We need systems, we all know that, and I love systems. I'm not very good at systems, but when I invent a system, or when I work in a system with people, I think it works. This is a system, and the other things we've been showing you are systems. And when you work with these systems, you secure that you get the children that are the 7%, and that's what we want. We want to get everybody on board. Now, the 4 values we've been talking about today is trust, to trust each other, and it will be interesting to see whether some of you will swap mobile phones, open mobile phones during lunch break. The other thing we've been talking about is not to compete, but to collaborate. Not to compete, but to collaborate. We also want to minimize the distance. We want to get closer to people. We want to use, for example, learning conversations in doing that. And we also want to show you that we know how you feel and that it's all right and that we can deal with that. So those were the 4 values we've been covering today. And I have a few remarks. So one thing is, we'd love to send you what we call UPV, which is a classic example of how to work with social and emotional learning. We've translated it into English, so if you want it, just send us a mail. We also like to send you some links to some films about the Nordic teaching model and how we work. Some inspirational films, some links for that. And lastly, we'd like to send you the PDF with the Nordic teaching model. Feel free to use it. We started inventing it. We've been using it in schools. Some schools use it for personal interviews. Some use it for developing teaching skills. And they use it for a lot of things. We just like it to be used. So if you want to, send us a mail on info@nordicschools.com. Send us a mail there, and we'd be very happy to send you all the things I just mentioned. The last thing I'm going to say before we get the questions, if there are any questions, that's wonderful. The last things I'm going to say is, when you go to, it's weird when you go to conferences. When I go to conferences, for example, before, I wanted to talk to the 2 chaps that were on, and they were gone, you know. Hey, I wanted to ask you a question, I want to talk to you. So, we won't leave. You won't get rid of us. We'll actually stay today and tomorrow and leaving Sunday morning for Sydney. So we'll be in Sydney, so you can contact us there. My point being, then come up to us and talk when we've done with this. We're eating lunch up there. Come up, talk to us, because we love to talk about schools and we'd love to talk to you about your school. Just talking, no strings attached, just talking, that would be great. So thank you very much for your very warm welcome today. Thank you very much.
Yay! That was really inspiring. That was great just to hear what is happening there and how the school system works. And I have got these questions. Not one of them is, how do you manage without a school administrator, business manager? No one's asked that. Are you afraid? But the question that's most popular is, I've heard students do very little homework. If so, how do you get through a curriculum and keep academic standards when in our school, even year 8s, which are like, you know, second year of high school, 14-year-olds or something, do 2 or more hours a day homework? Do you do homework?
In the state schools, 81% of the schools are state schools, and in the state schools you will have homework. In some of the private schools you will have homework, and then you have the free schools, the hippie schools you may call them, that my children attend, of course, you've discovered that, and they have no homework at all until they're 15. Mind you that John Hattie in his research says that it's when you're 13, 14 homework works. Before that it's a waste of time. just to let you know, it's a waste of time. It's a waste of their time. When they're 13 or 14, you can start giving them homework. I know you're not the teachers doing it, but you should tell the teachers, because it's a waste of time.
Excellent.
Says
I've always
research.
thought so, actually. It was in my case, but always, right through. If you do not follow a set curriculum, how do universities screen and approve of applications for potential students?
Well, in the universities, so moving on from, we have something called gymnasium. So you go to the Unity School, and then from then on you go to the gymnasium, which is like a mixture of college and high school, before you move on to the universities. And going to the universities, you need the grades. But moving on to college or gymnasium, it's actually the teachers who assess it.
Oh, what year is that, the gymnasium? How old are you when you go in there?
17, something like that.
Oh, so it's like 17. So how many years of school do you have before the gymnasium?
10 years.
Oh, 10 years. So we have 12. So you're talking about, instead of our like year 12s
Yeah.
or year 11s, you're going to a gymnasium if you want to go into uni. So that would, yeah, I see. The other, in Australia, the university score required to become a teacher is quite low. The message is inferred that as a society we don't value teachers as much as we would value doctors or lawyers and engineers. Is this the same in Nordic countries, or is the opposite true? If society values teachers highly, do you think the education system improves?
How long time have we got? 124. So, Finland, oh boy. Teachers up there, they're like doctors or lawyers. And in the other countries, Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, it's totally like here. It's different. And meaning that a lot of people get in, and maybe some of them should not get in. Whereas in Finland, even Pasi Salberg's daughter couldn't get in the first. I mean, he's the brilliant guy. She couldn't get in. She tried again, then she got in. So they have, like Kasper said, 5 years in university and a master's degree. They're very well trained. They even have PhDs training them. So they're very well trained. That was the shortest I could do.
That's the shortest, yeah. Well, maybe one quick one, which has, when do teachers conduct 40 20-minute conversations? Is this for each class or subject? It would take a lot of time. I suppose this is learning conversations. When would they do that?
It's not for each subject, so it's 4 times 20 minutes during a school year. And they're actually looking on making that even more. So it's during the lessons. In Denmark, we do a lot of co-teaching. So they have 2 teachers on the class at the same time. So what they do is, during the lesson, one of the teachers go out of the room and pulling out one pupil at the time. So that was the short answer.
Right.
And the pupils love it. I will tell you, they love it.
Yeah, we were thinking about bringing quotes from teachers and students and parents as well, but as you might have noticed, we were we have run out of time now. But it's been so stimulating, and I'm glad you're hanging around, because it'll be a great opportunity for people to speak with you. So you'll be up in the exhibition area.
Yeah, we'll be drunk in an hour, so before that, yes.
Well, this is like 1 in the morning for you or something, something like that. Could you please give Kasper and Casper a huge round of applause?
Thank you.